guys want to do Brandon Herreras. This is the weird guns being used in Ukraine right now. Let's see. Okay, let's check.
What is up, you sexy YouTube mother lovers? Now, today we're going to be
I'm going to turn this down just a little bit. I think it's not quite even.
taking a look at some of the crazy and unique weapons we've seen popping up on both sides of the current Ukrainian conflict.
Hey, thanks for the Prime sub, Theospalon. Appreciate it. Welcome.
If you recall, we did a video on this topic just over a week ago. But almost immediately after I posted that video, even crazier shit started coming out and you guys sent it to me. So I figured it was worth looking into because if nothing else, a lot of these guns are pretty fucking cool.
I actually saw a AK Operators Union bumper sticker the other day, but it accompanied a whole bunch of other, we're going to say political-ish bumper stickers that I found to be completely and absolutely insane.
So I grabbed some of those photos and clips and I figured that we would look over them together. So right off the bat, we're seeing some old weapons surface. Now in our last video, you might remember this gentleman with a Mosin Nagant, who I mistakenly identified as Russian. Turns out he's in the Ukrainian DPR.
Okay, the Ukrainian DPR, for those of you guys that don't know, is the Donetsk People's Republic. This is the breakaway region that basically has been annexed by Russia, not by Russia. So what happened is in 2014-ish, Russia supported these a separatist movement very, very heavily. So initially it was sort of on the back end, giving arms, ammunition, advice, guidance to this separatist republic. And it's in the eastern part of the country of Ukraine, and it's primarily Russian speaking, right? So that's an area where Russia has the strongest sort of base of loyalty. Most of the people identify culturally as Russian. And so this separatist movement, right, sort of came about. Of course, Ukraine was not, it did not want its territory to simply secede. And so their military pushed in. Their 2014 military was extremely out of date, extremely underfunded, and just generally not in a position to repel even these poorly funded separatists. But eventually they were able to get it together and start pushing them back, only to have Russia intervene more directly. In some cases, supposedly troops with the insignia stripped off their uniform arrived, some Russian special forces type teams, specialists like artillery specialists or drone specialists arrived. And so since 2014, Ukraine has been in a state of varying levels, varying intensities of open conflict with these separatists. So it's important when you hear the, how am I going to put this nicely, idiots, the idiot talking heads, and especially the idiot celebrities who are just like, Ukraine is a peaceful country. Ukraine has been in a state of war since 2014. So no, the fact that you think Ukraine is a country like a peaceful tourist destination is just indicative of the level of stupidity. Also, welcome to everybody who popped in. Alex, Icarus, Sarwolf.
Bad information from Reddit? That never happens. But the point being, the Mosin is a weapon system that is well over 100 years old.
Okay, I'm going to point this out. He called the Mosin a weapon system. And I'm going to take a little bit of issue with that because this is peak Mosin, man, by the way, if you haven't been on any of the gaming streams. But a weapon system refers to this idea that you don't just have a weapon, but that you have all these other parts that can go on and off to make it more than just a rifle. So for example, the M4 weapon system, it can have or not have an underbarrel grenade launcher. It can have or not have a close combat optic. It can have or not have a suppressor, PEC 15, right? So you can adjust the weapon to become a system. Similarly, you have like a Mark 19 grenade launcher system. And that, for example, can have, some level of optics and stuff, but it can be mounted to a tripod mount to become a static defense point. It can be mounted to a what's the word I want? A Pindle to become a turret mounted weapon. It can, even be attached to a Crow system and become part of a automated camera controlled turret, right? So that's why we sometimes call these things weapon systems, because they work as part of a system of parts. A Mosin probably wouldn't count as a weapon system, because a Mosin like this, a PU sniper, is standalone. Every component is intrinsic to the weapon.
But going even a step further, let's see what I've...
But if you were to issue, for example, the Mosin along with morphine and more morphine, then it might be considered a weapon system, right? Because the user can, stave off the shakes of their opioid addiction with the morphine while using the Mosin to shoot scabs. If you've been on my streams, you understand this joke. And if you don't, you think I'm some sort of maniac.
Bringing to the hayride. Now, ignoring for a moment the lawnmower trailer that Tom Sawyer painted a Z on, what we have here is a belt-fed, water-cooled Maxim Machine Gun. The Maxim Machine Gun was a
This is bananas, by the way.
Revolutionary MG that was so ahead of its time, basically everyone adopted it to some degree. They saw heavy use in World War I, which is probably what you picture when you think of them. But the Russians had commissioned one.
Yeah, somebody was pointing out in chat, this is Russian Civil War stuff. That's probably correct. And one of the things to point out is that this whole janky kind of look they have going on also to me says Russian separatists. Because, okay, so the Soviet Union was like your grandma that grew up in the Depression, right? It had this traumatic experience in World War II where they ran out of material to fight the war. And their factories were partially destroyed by the Germans. So the result was that war material was just really hard to procure, even basic stuff. So they said, we're never going to be in that situation again. We are always going to have enough stores to equip basically an entire army several times over. The result is that they have these big old surplus warehouses with thousands of units of gas masks and old Mosin Nagants and AKs and boxes of ammo. And that's why the Russians were insanely committed to this backwards compatible weapon systems, right? In which old rounds could be used in new weapons and newer weapons were parts compatible with old weapons, right? It was all about this idea that they had this deep reserve of material stockpiled in these warehouses. So obviously, the Russia has slowly, kicking and screaming, and not that effectively, tried to modernize its military and give them something akin to modern gear. Obviously, they haven't done it very well because only a small number of Russian troops appear to have been equipped with modern type weapons, and literally everyone else is running old stock. But the oldest of the old stock was given to those separatist republics that Russia sort of conjured up. And equipping the separatists, those separatists received some of Russia's oldest and most outdated equipment. So it makes perfect sense that they would mothball some sort of Maxim machine gun and put that out. Also, thanks to Sleepy Halibut for the Prime sub.
One specifically made in 7.62x54R, which is the same cartridge that the Mosin Nagant is chambered in, because they already had a shitload of those.
Right, rest my case.
But there's a reason I say that they're still technically older than the Mosin. Turns out the Maxim machine gun is even older than I thought. The original Maxim belt-fed machine gun was patented in 1883.
This is insane. Look at those wheels, dude. It literally is mounted to like an old school cannon.
Timeline-wise, this weapon was designed closer to the beginning of the American Revolution in 1776 than it was to the current Ukrainian conflict. I don't know about you, but that blows my fucking mind. But it's not just our Russian friend here. We've actually seen these pop up on the Ukrainian side as well. Here we see a Ukrainian with a dual-mounted Maxim setup, even with a red dot.
Okay, I'm going to point out something else. This whole back-end setup looks like there's a butterfly trigger. This looks like they, repurposed almost like a 50 cal. I think actually what they probably did is manufactured their own mountain pindle and then manufactured their own sort of custom trigger setup to pull the trigger on both of these. So this is still absolutely bananas.
Rigged up on top. Which, seeing a red dot on top of a Maxim is fucking hilarious.
Yeah, Blue the Shaman points out, it looks like an M2 with a Maxim barrel shroud. Yeah, that is what it looks like. However, let's back it up for just a sec. Also, welcome to variedicium. Welcome to this breakdown. There we go. Okay. Yeah, this is Brandon Herrera's moment, by the way. As someone who loves cursed gun images, this is like a real life cursed gun, right? And yeah, it looks like a 50 cal base or like back end, but this barrel opening looks like a 7.62 barrel. It doesn't look like something for a 50 cal. Also, because 50 cals, you need to do something called headspace and timing, because as you fire them over time, you have to kind of like get the spacing right between the barrels so it cycles properly. You wouldn't want to have this sort of water cooling mechanism
on top.
It could be a Dishka cord with a Maxim shroud. I could see that.
Which, seeing a red dot on top of a Maxim is fucking hilarious to me, because
yeah, and Ram points out that a red dot in a dual weapon system doesn't make any sense. And that's true. That whole thing, the red dot really only looks centered in this on one of the weapons. So it's almost like the second weapon is meant to maybe it's like one weapon straight and the other one angles into it. It may just be something that's sort of field expediently done, and there's an understanding that you can put the reticle a little to the right of your target and hit it. Could also be something where there's one trigger for the left gun and one trigger for the right gun. All right, let's see.
Hilarious to me, because the Maxim was only designed like 4 years later than Edison came out with the light bulb. So that's kind of strange. It's like seeing an LS swap Model T. It's just something in my mind, it doesn't work. All of this is really making me want a Russian Maxim for a range video. Or maybe I already have one on the way. I guess you'll have to subscribe to find out. Plus, if you don't, you miss all the rad shit we're doing next week. Now, another World War II gun that we saw was a DP-27.
I've pointed this out before, that the hodgepodge of different plate carriers that all these different Ukraine volunteers have. It's pretty fascinating. And it's also fascinating to me that only one of these guys has a helmet.
In the hands of the Chad that I have now coined Little Tachanka. But earlier today, I was sent this photo of a DP-27 with some slight modifications. This DP has eliminated the need for iron sights by having a pretty seriously high-rise optic on top. Having an optic instead of crude irons kind of makes a lot of sense, especially considering some of the distances I've seen these engagements go to. A lot of early machine gun iron sights were kind of minute of trench.
Yeah, what he's talking about is the fact that, machine guns are not meant to be accurate in the person-to-person sense. They're meant to provide suppressive fire or to suppress an area, right? And so that means that you're sending more of a to whom it may concern type of message. So the iron sights are more about getting the elevation right and ballparking it. Of course, in modern engagements, you definitely want to, put accurate rounds on target. And certainly a modern weapon can do that. A modern, light machine gun is going to be able to put rounds pretty accurately on target, especially if you have a bipod or another stable shooting position. Alderin, thanks for the sub, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so the fact that this has an optic at least gives them a fighting chance. Of course, an optic is only as good as the weapon is accurate and the mount holds at 0, but this looks like it's drilled into the stock, so the odds look pretty good. And yeah, it's just tough to know if you can even zero an optic like this, because yeah, that's another issue, is that, tailor-made optics you can line up to be zeroed at like 50 meters, 100 meters, whatever. But this, it's not clear. This is way above the barrel. So it may not be zero. It may have the shortest zero to be like 100 meters plus.
We also see a suppressor added to this particular rifle, which is obviously a fairly recent addition. Because when I think stealth, I think of 47 rounds of 7.62 by 54R out of a 100-year-old machine gun. Not even gonna lie, I'd rock it.
I don't know what the suppressor, you see, a lot of suppressors to achieve their full effect require subsonic rounds. I don't think their 7.62 by 54 are subsonics. But I've also heard a lot, like the U.S. military is actually using suppressors mostly to protect soldiers' hearing.
But now let's go with something a little bit more modern. Very modern, in fact. Here we have a captured AS Val. Now I can already hear what you're saying. Brandon, we did an AS Val in the last episode. Yeah, but this one
Someone in chat, Halibut makes a good point in chat. It may also be effective as flash suppression.
is a little different. In fact, it's not actually an AS Val. Technically, the rifle that we're looking at right now is considered an ASM Val. You can tell because of the modernized features, which I'm assuming is what the M stands for. Like, for example, the railed dust cover that we have here instead of the traditional side-mounted optics. These are super neat because we really don't have any photos or videos of these. In fact, the ASM Val was only revealed, I think, a couple years ago, like a trade show or something. Some Russian military show where they were pimping out all their new shit. God knows how many of these actually exist, but it's kind of cool to see one in the wild.
I mean, one thing I want to point out about this optic is that I'm having a hard time, like, seeing what it's good for. So this eye cup, right, is meant to block out ambient light. It's meant to touch your eye. But my understanding is that the AS Val fires a subsonic type of round. And it's got this integrated suppressor. But again, for it to really be stealthy, it needs subsonics. And subsonics don't have that great a travel distance. And it's not clear on why you would want, looks like a several times optic for a 9x39.
Now, the scope that he's using here might be a little optimistic for 9x39, considering this has like, the ballistic trajectory of a 45 ACP, but hey, at least he's got optics. Still, very cool to see. Now,
so, I say that if you were to say shoot squirrels with an BB gun or an airsoft rifle, you would have a scope on that, and no one would think you were really weird by having a 2 or 3 times magnification on that. But that's because you want to deliver precision shots.
While it's cool to see everybody using Ukraine as an example of why gun rights in civilian hands might be important,
but it's crucial to use that as an option. This is the other reason that glad I watched this before. He actually is sponsored sort of by a lobbying organization in the U.S. to lobby for political causes. So we're going to skip that because this is an apolitical channel.
Video of this, I don't know if it's like a machine shop, auto repair shop, whatever, converted now to be a gunsmithing shop. Specifically converting guns that are taken off of Russian tanks and APCs and things and turning them into light machine guns that actually can be carried by infantry troops. Specifically the PKM.
This is pretty fascinating because if you go to a U.S. auto body shop, they will not be able to do this sort of thing. Manufacture original parts. This is something that's more of a purpose-built machine shop, which to me is actually an interesting commentary on Ukraine, and that in a place like Ukraine, it may actually be cheaper to manufacture your own car parts instead of getting them from the manufacturer, which if you've had a car fixed in the US, car parts are very expensive. So it makes total sense that you would want the ability to do at least basic parts in-house. I imagine too, if you had things like a 3D printer, just the ability to do some bending of wires, grinder, a welder, you could probably fabricate a lot.
The PKM being the very iconic and prolific Russian light machine gun, also designed by Mikhail Kalashnikov, by the way. Technically the PK light machine gun that was later developed into the PKM, or the PK modernized, just like how you had the AK-47 and then the AKM. Now what they're doing here is they're taking the PKT, which is the PK machine gun modified to be, on a tank or, armored vehicles, and they're converting them to be kind of equivalent to a PKM, which is meant to be used by infantry. Since they're to be used on tanks, the PKTs do not have stocks.
I love how they're literally working on cars in between doing these weapons.
But what they're doing here is not quite as easy as it looks. They're not just grafting a stock onto a PKT. They actually have to change the entire firing mechanism because the PKT is meant to be fired from a tank, actually using an electrical solenoid.
So that's crazy. Yeah, they have to literally create a trigger from scratch. I wonder if they're able to use old parts kits from other AK type weapons. I know the AKs are famously modular, so I wonder if they could take like an old, AK-74U and with a couple of proprietary or homemade parts actually get it on there to be a decent firing mechanism.
There's no real trigger mechanism necessarily, at least not an exposed one that's meant to be fired by, somebody on the ground.
I mean, or you could use a 3D printer, I suspect, to build 3D print essential parts. I mean, but this looks like an AK style Bakelite grip, and this looks like something straight out of a PKM.
They had to rig up an entirely new firing system to...
No, but that looks different. Yeah, this doesn't look like a classic PKM stock. This looks like something that's done in-house. Yeah, this may be 3D printed or some other in-house manufacturing.
To rig up to these things and quickly, and frankly, I'm impressed. Ghetto gunsmith to ghetto gunsmith, crisp internet high five. But desperation being the mother of all invention, kind of cool to see what these guys have rigged up. Now back to something old again. Now this right here is from a lot of weapons that I think were captured from Ukrainian defense forces. This one specifically being an MP40, known as the iconic German submachine gun of World War II. Chambered in 9mm, the MP40 submachine gun has significant sex appeal and just flat out German World War II drip. Very rare here in the States, but apparently not so rare over in Ukraine. Now on the other side,
that is pretty wild. And what's interesting is, if you know anything, you know a big part of the Russian propaganda effort has focused on the fact that Ukraine, let's see, how can I say this without getting demonetized? Russia's propaganda machine has tried really hard to associate Ukraine's current government with the bad guys of World War II. And it hasn't really been successful, though not in the West, but to some of the people in places like the DNR and LNR, they may actually be landing a little bit. There's a lot of, if you look at some of the pre-war reporting in those regions, you notice that a lot of the separatists really harken back to that World War II stuff. It's a little bit pathetic, actually, how much World War II cosplaying is going on.
Side of the German MP40 during World War II would have been the Russian submachine guns, the PPSH-41, and in this case, the Russian PPS-43, which is what this Russian gentleman has. He describes it as, quote, taking grandpa for a walk. The PPS-43 being the Russian submachine gun that replaced the PPSH-41, designed by Sadayev. Still chambered in 7.62 by 25 Tokarev, which is kind of like a slightly smaller diameter projectile, but just kind of an all-around hotter pistol cartridge compared to the 9mm SMG.
Yeah, that sounds really hard to get ammo for some of this stuff. But to his credit, he appears to have a proper bulletproof vest. I mean, it looks like it's a plate carrier, or can carry plates, but also have Kevlar.
Is it old? Yeah. Is it functional as a modern submachine gun? I wouldn't fucking want to get shot at with it. Now back to something new.
Right. And this is the thing. So submachine guns, right, they're going to be engaged at pistol ranges, but if you're doing something like checkpoint operations, for example, a submachine gun would be perfect for that. If you are securing government buildings, anything where you expect your fighting to be done within 50 meters, then yeah, a submachine gun like this would be perfect. Is it competitive, again, with modern special operations forces or whatever? No, not really.
Here we have a man who I believe is fighting with Chechen forces who has a Zenitco'd out AK-74. Now I'm showing this off again because this is just an example of what Zenitco is. Zenitco is like an accessory company that is based out of Russia that's kind of like, I guess, the new hotness for the AK. They were some of the first non-cringe aftermarket accessories because they actually held zero and things like this dust cover rail and everything, and they honestly just look great. So they've kind of stuck around ever since. They've got things like this PT-1 folding stock, which the Chechen gentleman also has. It's also, again, got the B-33 dust cover rail for mounting optics. This one, of course, is chambered in 7.62 by 39, where the one in the photo is 5.45, but you get the picture. This is another interesting example of Chechen forces being better equipped than the average Russian ground soldier.
So, okay.
Apparently the reason behind this is that some of the Chechen soldiers are known to be vicious fighters. They stand and fight instead of running like some of their comrades, which is why the Russian military invests money into them. So despite all the ideological differences between, Muslims and Eastern Orthodox country, apparently they're still very valued by the Russian military.
So, okay, we've discussed this on my channel. I think there's actually a little more to it because these Chechens are better equipped even than the VDV. And the VDV, of course, are definitely Russia's most serious and business-like forces. I think a big part of it is that Chechnya and the Chechen forces have a different set of incentives that you're less likely to see corruption. So we've talked how in Russia it is normal to sell off gear, siphon off material, even at basically every level, right? Part of your pay as a officer of any level is that you can, sell off a little bit of gear of your own. And even privates, it's common to sell off gear or to sell off parts from your tanks, sell off your fuel, for example. And in Chechnya, right, and no one is any the worse off, right? You're a conscript army in Russia. Of course, you do your 2 years and then you go home and no one cares. But in Chechnya, things are a little different, right? This is a smaller region in which Russia has aligned itself with a certain like tribal or familial clan, we'll say. And so there's constantly again, I'm going to use the word clan. I don't think this is quite right, but there's an inter-clan tension at work, right? So the current dictator, Rustam Kazdrov, he and his clan, right, have an incentive both to be powerful militarily as a check against Russian aggression, right? Because Kadyrov obviously wants to have a powerful military to check against Russian aggression, but also wants his in-group to be as armed and as powerful as humanly possible in order to keep him in power and to keep his rivals keep the power differential between him and his rivals as high as possible. So he has a vested interest in ensuring that good quality gear gets down to his fighters. Obviously, Chechnya has a strong warrior culture like Dagestan. Kadyrov. Thanks to chat. Chat's giving me the pronunciation, man. You guys doing me a solid, Azzy. So anyway, Kadyrov. Yeah, he has an incentive. So Chechnya has a strong warrior culture, just like Dagestan. But he also has a massive incentive to ensure that his in-group army is well-trained, well-equipped, and ready to fight. Because simply they will probably have to come back and settle business at home.
Definitely.
But there's also, I think, a little bit of a cultural norm here where, Kadyrov looks down his chain of command and sees people who are fundamentally in his in-group. They're from his tribe. They practice the same religion. They are culturally aligned with him. And so, yes, he obviously is getting incredibly wealthy off their backs, but I think there may be a limit to how much his junior leaders are stealing or pillaging from their direct subordinates, right? They're probably siphoning off a little bit, but it probably looks nothing like what a typical Russian chain of command will siphon off from their conscripts.
Strange, but also I think kind of interesting. We've bounced back and forth between old, new. How about something old and something new together? Kind of like an Instagram model with her 70-year-old sugar daddy. So here we have potentially captured weapons again, but on the left we have the CZ Bren, and on the right we have the notorious MG42. Bad Mustache Man's buzzsaw. Now, to be fair, it's really hard to tell just from this photo whether that's an MG42 or something like an MG3. It's a more modern variant, but it's basically identical. The only major difference being that the MG3 was built to comply more with NATO standards, so it's chambered in .308 instead of 8mm Mauser, like the original MG42. Either way, this gun is fully...
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to hear the story about how Germany, right, you may know, after World War II, obviously had its military dismantled almost entirely. But as the Cold War heated up and as the US began to commit more and more troops in places like Korea, the pressure to actually raise a German army to ensure a level of military parity in Europe was pretty great. And when they did finally stand up the German military, remember, this was in the, I think, mid-50s. So you had people who had served in the German armed forces of the Second World War who, in some cases, were brought back in, especially at the senior officer level. And supposedly the vetting process was fastidious, right? It was so hard to get cleared as one of the few people with with military leadership experience in Germany in 1953, but who wasn't tainted by the toxic ideology. Man, look at me tap dance around the no words of YouTube. So the fact that they could do that was a real challenge. But then when they did stand up the military, they looked, well, a lot like the Ukrainian military today, a hodgepodge of weapons on what was available. So it was a combination of native World War II weapons, donated U.S. weaponry. In fact, a lot of times the U.S. donated a large number of their World War II helmets just because the silhouette of the old German World War II helmets was so iconically bad. So the result, of course, was something like this, right? A hodgepodge of weapons, and you would probably have seen an MG42 or two.
Prepared to give your ass a real bad fucking time trying to storm Normandy Beach. And while this is a cool photo, I think it goes a little bit deeper because I think this just about sums up what's been so crazy about this conflict as a whole.
Also, I just want to point out, whoever's running this Bren has taped 2 magazines together. That's pretty wild, but no optic, or someone has already stolen the optic.
A lot of us, especially here in the West, are seeing war for the first time in a non-third world scenario. But even...
Okay, I take some minor issue with this because, one, the term third world refers to a Cold War era balance between the US and USSR, and so Ukraine would have been considered second world if we're using that paradigm. If he's using the paradigm of human development, let's see here. Let's do a quick examination. Let's see. Let's look at the Human Development Index ranking by country, and we'll see if we think. Here we go. Let's pop it on there. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do 2019 data, because obviously 2022 data was pretty bad. But let's just see where Ukraine falls in the grand scheme of things. Okay. Okay, I wanna find Ukraine. There we go. Ukraine is comfortably in the 70s in terms of the Human Development Index. That puts it below Mexico, Grenada, Bosnia, Sri Lanka, Iran, Cuba, Albania, Trinidad and Tobago, the Seychelles, Serbia, Kuwait, Malaysia, Costa Rica, Barbados, Bahamas, Panama, Bulgaria, Uruguay, Turkey, Belarus, and of course, Russia and Kazakhstan. So all this to say, if you're... I don't know if I'd even, consider Finland to be third world, right? What's your cutoff, right? Is Saudi Arabia, is Bahrain considered third world? Well, that's not a good example. They're oil-rich nations. Is Argentina third world? No, of course not. But it beats Ukraine by several points, several places, right? And if you're talking about things in the 0.77 range, you're looking at Grenada, Mexico, St. Kitts, Peru, Thailand, Armenia, Colombia. Interesting to see Brazil and China down here. Ecuador, Azerbaijan, Moldova. Yeah, some people call it the global south. But anyway, my point is Ukraine is... I understand that like Ukraine is really connected to Europe. And this is the first time we have seen a fully modernized state military attack another country since the U.S. invaded Iraq. But it's not fair to say that Ukraine is like this like bastion of develop. This is not like Russia has invaded Germany or France or Italy or even Poland, who I think is up here in the 30s, right? Is in one of the top 35 countries in terms of human development. Right. This is something firmly down a ways. Anyway, guys, yeah, just important because there's so many people, and you guys have heard me complain about this. There's a lot of people out there who are mischaracterizing this conflict or Ukraine's position in the global community. either because they're dumb or because they want it to feel more important than it is. You know, like, yeah, I get it. Ukraine is a country that did not invade, that is being invaded by its very, very powerful neighbor and a first world military. And Ukraine is a, you know, yeah, Ukraine is a developing country, right? Become a European ally in a lot of ways. But let's not say things that aren't true. Things about Ukraine is peaceful and hasn't seen war. Also, the people who are like, Europe hasn't seen war. Well, again, Ukraine, no, war since 2014, active war. And even before that, you're looking at Bosnia Herzegovina, the entire Yugoslav crisis, the Kosovar and Albanians. So yeah, I don't know. This is me. Yeah, Jacob Ling describes it best. It's a post-Soviet country that is liberalizing, right?
You're seeing all sorts of modern munitions, anti-armor stuff, aircraft, drones. But then in the exact same confrontation, you're also having guys that are carrying around weapons that are so old that their great-grandfathers could have easily carried it in the great war to end all wars. And while the reality of war is obviously very tragic, the significance of some of the stuff being used in the field is extremely interesting, especially to guys like me. And if you pay close enough attention, the irony behind some of the equipment being used is just dripping. But I hope this video was interesting for you guys. And if you
yeah, anyway, guys, oh yeah, let's get you guys the link here. Yeah, that was pretty good, man. And he's right. This is a very strange blend between old and new. It's also sort of a testament to a certain strange type of warfare. This is a weird balance to find yourself in, between old and new, between the classic armored warfare, the Second World War, and sort of this modern small but high-tech unit warfare. And yeah, I'm fascinated to watch it as someone who has, served in a totally different war, in a totally different continent.
What did you do to me? I killed alone, 1, 2, 3 for champions. I can't believe it's wrong.